Joining us on the line is Jason Greenblatt. He served as one of the chief architects of the Peace to Prosperity plan between Israel and the Palestinians. He also played a significant role in helping establish President Trump's historic policies and achievements regarding the Abraham Accords. He has a recently published book titled In the Path of Abraham, How Donald Trump Made Peace in the Middle East and How to Stop Joe Biden from Unmaking It. Jason, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me as a guest.
So, Jason, one of the big issues that is coming up now, Joe Biden has sort of announced that there won't be an Iran deal on the table prior to the midterm elections. I assume that's because he doesn't want it to be an issue in the midterm elections, but he would like to cut some sort of deal with Iran, which obviously would facilitate a breakup of the Middle East again, more of a crack up of the Middle East. He'd like to do that post the 2022 elections. What do you make of his stress on an Iran deal?
Look, we're going there in such a weak position. We're begging Europeans to beg the Iranians to get into a deal, and all the deal is going to do is give a fortune of money to the Iranians to foment terrorism around the Middle East, for Hamas to continue to lob missiles at Israel to try to destroy Israel, for the Houthi terrorists to lob missiles at the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The Europeans are not our allies in this. They just want to make money from Iran. It's compounded by the fact that now they need cheap energy, so it's even worse than before. This has been a roller coaster ride, and what President Biden is doing is very, very dangerous.
And Jason, it seems as though the Biden administration is facilitating some of the most dangerous policy possible in the Middle East. They keep on announcing increasing levels of support, for example, for the Palestinian Authority, increasing levels of quote-unquote humanitarian aid for the Gaza Strip, all of which is going to be grabbed by Hamas and used to create rockets, or is going to be seized by Islamic Jihad and used for terrorism. You know, what sort of myths is the Biden administration buying into that they are undermining what is obvious positive change on the ground?
Instead of demanding change out of the Palestinian Authority so that they stop terrorizing Israel, so they stop paying terrorists to murder and harm Israelis and follow the Taylor Force Act and continue beyond the Taylor Force Act, they're coddling the Palestinians. They're basically demanding nothing of them. They're giving them these diplomatic, political wins. Those diplomatic and political wins do nothing to achieve peace, do nothing to help Palestinian lives on the ground. The Palestinian economy is a terrible economy. Israel has tried many ways to try to help it. The U.S., especially under the Trump administration, had tried many ways, but to actually help the economy, not just hand over money that ends up being used for bad acts or for corruption or for mismanagement. Whereas the Biden administration takes a different view. They just want to write checks, U.S. taxpayer checks, by the way, in order to keep things calm. But keeping things calm is never going to resolve anything, and it doesn't help Palestinians. It's a very misguided effort.
We're speaking with Jason Greenblatt. His new book is In the Path of Abraham, How Donald Trump Made Peace in the Middle East and How to Stop Joe Biden from Unmaking It. Now, speaking of unmaking that peace, one of the things I think everybody thought over the last year and a half, 2 years, is that normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel was on the table. I mean, it was pretty obvious that the UAE, for example, was not going to normalize relations with Israel without the Saudi government at least tacitly supporting all of that. We've seen additional security cooperation between the Saudis and Israel. I have it on pretty good authority that the Saudis had been planning, if Donald Trump had won re-election, to normalize relations with Israel. What has the Biden administration been doing to undermine that? Because clearly it hasn't happened at this point.
Well, until President Biden's recent trip to Saudi Arabia, where he fist bumped the crown prince, it was a disaster. He was basically disrespecting Saudi Arabia, following through on his campaign promise to make Saudi Arabia the pariah that he thought it was. He said there was very little social redeeming value in Saudi Arabia. He was disrespecting the crown prince. I'll give him credit. He went there. He did the right thing, but he really just turned one page of many pages and chapters that he still has to turn in order to respect Saudi Arabia, treat them like the friend and the ally that they are. They're a key player in the region itself. As to the Abraham Accords, I take a bit of a different view. I say that let's, instead of asking when they're going to sign the Abraham Accords, let's acknowledge what they've done so far. So they were very supportive of the peace plan that President Trump released in January of 2020. If you read their remarks, they were quite positive. They opened up air corridors for Israel to fly to and from Bahrain and for Israel to fly to and from UAE. And about 8 weeks ago, they opened up their entire airspace for Israeli flights to head out. So with each step, I think that the Saudis are moving in a positive direction. But with an Iran deal still on the table, the entire region, including Saudi Arabia, are very nervous, and I'm not sure that we're going to see much progress out of them because of that, among other reasons.
So, Jason, over the course of the next few years, what do you expect out of the Middle East? Obviously, Iran is ramping up its nuclear program. They're going to do that with or without American dollars. Right now, they're doing it without American dollars. If Joe Biden has his way, they will do it tacitly with American dollars. We're seeing Iran spread its predations into Lebanon. We've obviously seen Hamas that continues to rearm after the last war with Israel. Israel devastated a lot of their military armaments and killed a lot of their top leaders, but Hamas is rearming. Hezbollah is extraordinarily powerful in southern Lebanon. They have like 150,000 rockets pointed at Israel. And meanwhile, the Saudis are on tenterhooks about the gaining power of Iran, not just to their north, but also with regard to their support for the Houthis in the south in Yemen. So what do you foresee in the Middle East, sort of broadly speaking? It seemed as though the Middle East was reaching a lot more of a solid state under President Trump, and now looks like chaos is the rule of the day over there.
It was, and one of the best things we could do is recognize that it's a volatile region, that Iran wants nothing more than to destroy the Jewish state of Israel. Iran wants to take over those beautiful skyscrapers in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Doha and the things that are built in Saudi Arabia. And we have to understand that we are not going to turn the Middle East into America. We have to understand their fears, their needs. And until we do that, the Middle East will remain on tenterhooks. The best thing that could happen to them is a continuation of the development of mutual military partnerships. If they're going to beat Iran, if they're going to hold back Iran, they have to do it together, including Saudi Arabia, including Qatar, not just the UAE and Israel. And I hope that they will continue to work together, because at the end, they really can't rely on anyone else other than themselves. America may help them. America may try to help them. And it really depends on the president who's occupying the Oval Office. But they have to be prepared that they're going to have to go it alone.
We're speaking with Jason Greenblatt. He served as one of the chief architects of the Peace to Prosperity plan between Israel and the Palestinians. Has a brand new book called In the Path of Abraham, How Donald Trump Made Peace in the Middle East and How to Stop Joe Biden from Unmaking It. And meanwhile, the United Nations continues to target Israel, of course, because the United Nations is the most Isley of international politics, a hive of wretched scum and villainy. But how bad is the UN? For those who don't follow the UN, how bad is the UN with regard to both the United States and Israel?
When it comes to Israel, the UN is an absolute cesspool. They're constantly voting against Israel. Anytime we try to make progress with respect to Israel, the Security Council in particular was terrible. There was a point in time where we tried to get the UN Security Council. This was under Nikki Haley, who did an amazing job, her leadership. And we failed to get the UN Security Council and actually the General Assembly even to call Hamas a terror organization. Imagine that. They have all these condemnations of Israel, but they were unable to get their act together to call Hamas a terror organization. Even when it comes to the United States, they take lots of money from the United States. We gain very little from it. It's a corrupt organization in some ways. There are some parts of it that do good. But for the most part, I think it needs to be completely retooled. But as with respect to Israel, it's a terrible, terrible place.
Well, that is Jason Greenblatt. You can pick up a copy of his latest book, In the Path of Abraham, How Donald Trump Made Peace in the Middle East and How to Stop Joe Biden from Unmaking It. Jason, really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.